knock it out. And one question first, we go around the horn. So don't put five questions in there. Put a question or what you want to talk about, and then we'll work it through that way. I'm sorry, did I interrupt who I interrupted? I apologize.
No, you're good. So I'm at work on my iPhone here. So
Okay.
do I ask you? Or do I type in the question, or what do you want to do?
Yeah, type into the question. And if it's too much of a hassle, let's see, is there anything in the chat yet? There's not. So you can just tell me what it is. What is it? Are you first in the queue? If you are, what's your question? What then we'll knock it out first.
Um, what that Series 7 has a lot 90% of it's the suitability.
Yep. Yep. The key to attacking suitability. I just today posted a video about income or adjustment bonds. And I said the test question is no, they're not suitable for somebody who wants income, surprisingly enough, because that's what they don't do. So you should attack it through knowing those investment vehicles, partnerships. You should definitely know not suitable for somebody who needs liquidity. So there's a lot of less consensus on what would be suitable given somebody's, investment objective. A lot more consensus on recognizing things that are clearly unsuitable. I used to say, everybody does it differently. I like to say to customers, I'd like to read you a list of investment objectives. I'd like you to rate them on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very important, 1 not important at all. Safety of principal, 10. Tax-free income, 10. Ooh. Growth, 0. I said, well, there isn't a 0.
Right.
I get it, right? Maybe I recommend to you a triple A muni bond tax exempt fund. Not the question. It would be something clearly unsuitable given somebody's investment objective. In that situation, I certainly shouldn't recommend to you a long straddle, for example. Right? We should definitely know generating additional income is a covered call. If somebody's trying to protect the gain in a stock, either a sell stop order or buying a put. So you can't possibly, I think when people are struggling with suitability, it's because they haven't laid enough base knowledge on the investment vehicles themselves. I love that analogy, the investment vehicle analogy, right? I say, listen, this is a Ferrari. It's capable of high speed and second gear. I'm not sure this is the right vehicle for you. Let me show you some vans. You got kids, soccer games on weekends. Ferrari, I don't think it's the right vehicle for you.
Yeah.
My former sister-in-law, I've had a couple, but man, when I bought a sports car, she said, that car is so not functional. I said, Kim, that's the whole point of this car. It screams to the world that it's not functional. Well, that means Dean's got a lot of money to burn. Otherwise, wouldn't be driving a car like this. Right? So, pickup truck. I bought a farm truck here on my off-grid location, right? It goes to the dump. I can't be taking my sports car to the dump. That doesn't work. So, anyways, I would also tell you where suitability, I have a suitability playlist for Series 7. I think the other people who struggle with suitability is not understanding their judgment questions. So, the three styles of questions you get are recognition. Mutual fund has to compute NAV once per business day, for example.
Yep.
Practical application. Can't be getting those up. What's parity? And then the hardest questions you get on Series 7 are judgment questions. Yeah. I think Noah's okay because he's got his beard. I used to have a beard, and when I couldn't get an answer, I'd go like this, and all my answers would be in my beard. I had a young lady, she twirled her hair. She had a hair twirls where she found her answers. But in the judgment questions, we typically get it to a 50-50. Only about 10% of your exam is 50-50, but I miss those too. Because I get it like an asset allocation question, and I'm a little too aggressive. I go, well, gee, I believe you should be over equitized at all times in your life. But, that's not what the test wants, right? So
Right.
you're going to give up. Let's say there's 10% of it is judgment. You're going to get miss 3 or 4 of those, regardless of how hard you work, just because it depends on the guy who wrote the question and what
Right.
he's looking for. And it's very frustrating. I just did a shared screen practice test with somebody the other day, and it's STC, and I haven't seen the STC questions. And even I miss them because, like, man, if that guy was right there who wrote the question, I would go at it with him and say, hey, well, how are we supposed to get that from this question? Oh well. So, you just got to make sure you have that margin of safety in those circumstances. So, jocks, I had a question on the test that was a bond. It was 105 at 3% and was called at 4%. Well, it wouldn't be called at 4%. It would be called at the call price and the call date. So I'm not sure on the debrief here. If it's at a premium, we should know that they would replace the high cost debt with low cost debt. And they can't do that until it passes its call protection period. So maybe I say it's callable in 5 years. For example, I lent the Ford Motor Company $100,000. They agreed to pay me 8%. So I'm expecting two payments of $4,000 every 6 months, January 1st, July 1st. And I expected to get 20 payments of $4,000, 10 years to maturity, 4,000 every 6 months, but it was callable in 5 years at par. And they called it away from me. Damn. So I only got 10 payments of $4,000, right? So that's call risk. Call risk is associated with a declining interest rate environment. What was the payout? Well, it was callable. You can't tell me the payout unless I tell you what the price was. What was the call price, right?
It did. Yeah, it did not say the call price in there. Like the intercept was like 1050.
Well, in my example, it would be the yield to call. So what I made was the 8%.
Okay,
So you made the 3%.
that's. I was so confused on that one. I was like,
Yeah. Yeah.
it didn't make sense.
And I
But
got to tell you,
yeah,
the 65, I think, and people who are taking seven are incredulous when I say this, that I think the 65 is the toughest exam uh, in this regard. Dustin's taking a seven, and we torment him on a teeter-totter and the relationship of price and yields on that. And so, it's something that when he comes to take his 66, he's going to be a little more familiar with. Whereas a 65, you got to lay all that base, and the seven has a narrative thread to it. Find a customer, open an account, make an investment. And the 65, in my opinion, doesn't have a narrative thread to it. It's all over the place.
yeah.
You got a bond question, then you're over here with a different kind of question. Well, there you go, Noah. One question I do not believe is knowledge deficit. And I just was talking this morning about this, and I'm dating myself. But as a young man, they didn't used to give you 30, make you wait 30 days. And I would just say, if you call me and say I missed it by 1 or 2 points, I'd say, no, just write another check right there on the spot and cue that thing back up. Because, it's very likely you're going to get a draw you can pass. So I don't think it's knowledge deficit. Now we make you wait 30 days. I have moved off grid here and I had to redo my licenses and registrations. And, I went to take the driver's test and, she said, well, do you want to study? Because I just asked to take the test. And, I said, no, I said, I'm a pretty good test taker. So let me just try it that way first and see how close I come. I missed it by 1 point.
Mm.
Like Noah, and Noah, I said, is there a 30-day wait period? And she looked at me like, what the hell are you talking about? I said, well, the exams I help people pass, they got to wait 30 days. She goes, well, no, you can take it again if you want. I go, give it to me again. She goes, you don't want to study? I go, no, I only missed it by 1 point. And you gave me the rationales. I missed it again, Noah, by 1 point. And I did something I tell you guys never to do. I changed an answer. I outsmarted myself.
Right.
I thought, oh man, maybe they mean this. I missed it. And I said, hey, listen, how deep is this draw? She goes, what do you mean? I said, well, this is my second attempt. I'm already seeing repeat questions from the first attempt. And you gave me the answer key and rationale. She said, well, there's 5 of these tests. I goes, there's only 5. There was a guy next to me and he'd failed twice. I said, hey, Noah, we should form a syndicate. Between the two of us, we've got 4 of the 5 potential draws. I said, let's go out there. And she goes, are you guys going out there to study? I go, call it what you will. Right? Came back, passed the exam. So unfortunately, you got to wait 30 days. When you miss your mark, I have 5 recommendations. I'll have a new video out soon on that first recommendation. And the first recommendation is to get the test specifications or the study guide while the hurt is fresh. And I want you to go through that study guide or content test specifications. And I want you to do plus, 0, minus. The reason I make a new video is because, boy, this young lady really did it correctly, man. And then what we're looking for counterintuitively is the minus signs. Right. So maybe Jock gets to that point about bonds and goes, ah, that's that thing that I saw. I got to go back in the cave. And we're looking for the minuses. And then what we want to do with that intellectual debrief, intellectual inventory that you do with yourself is turn all those minuses into zeros, which is par. Now, I don't want to put out negative vibes, but people who fail twice, I just told you, no, it's not a knowledge deficit problem. And so, if you fail the second time, sometimes what people happen is they bring all their pluses, all minuses to par, but then they don't look at the above par pluses and they're preparing for the draw they got last time. Instead of the draw, they get this time. And what happens is sometimes those strong things fall off or they don't get asked on those, and then they miss it again. So once we get all the minuses to par, then we want to turn all the pars, everything to pluses and review the pluses and make sure we overlearn so we have that margin of safety on that second attempt. Make sure you're doing practice tests just to keep bringing up the caboose, right? So you want to remediate the areas where you feel. Now, maybe, Noah, sometimes it's more challenging if you almost passed everything. By the way, that printout that I'm suggesting to both of you will match perfectly to your printout. It's going to tell you exactly as what behind those things where they say below performance or adequate performance. It will spell out in depth what those things are, which makes it easier for you to attack it and remediate it. So very testable. All right, Philip, 66. Would a federally covered IA with no office of state, but not more? The five has nothing to do with it. Once you take federally covered to me, the five just goes out the window. There's no such thing as de minimis for federally covered investment advisors or federally covered investment advisor reps of federally covered. I could have 1,000 clients in California, no office, no register, right? So that de minimis, I don't like that you have de minimis in the context, Philip, of a federally covered advisor because they don't need it. They don't need de minimis because there's no such thing as de minimis for a federally covered investment advisor. A federally covered investment advisor only registered with the SEC, period, full stop, never both. I have a great video called Who's Your Daddy? And your daddy is either the SEC or the state administrator, never, never both. The de minimis is not would be on the state. So, here I am off grid and I decide I'm going to get back into the business. And God knows I wouldn't start another broker dealer. I had both a broker dealer and an investment advisor. Investment advisory is so much easier. So Dean's going to set up an investment advisory for called Anvil Rock Investment Management. I'm in Arizona. I'm going to register with the state of Arizona because I don't think out of the gate I would have 100 million plus. I might. Yeah, I've been pretty blessed. Maybe I call one of my billionaire guys and go, hey, throw 100 million my way. What do you care, right? And they say, Dean, well, Dean, why do you want 100 million? I said, I'll just put it in a money market fund. I won't touch it. It'll never be at risk. Yeah. I just need the 100 million to be federally covered. So he says, are you nuts? I go, nice try. I register with the state and I'm in northern Arizona. There's no money up here. I'm joking. There's some cattle guys who have some money. And, in this community, I'm one of the richest guys around, which isn't saying much. The real money is in Las Vegas. And I say, man, I got to go to Nevada to get some money. So the question is, does Anvil Rock Investment Management, state covered advisor, registered in the state of Arizona, have to register in Nevada? And the answer now, de minimis, comes into play. If I have no office in Nevada and I don't have more than 5 retail clients, I don't have to register. That's only a conversation if I'm state covered, not if I'm federally covered, right? So let's read the question again. Would a federally covered to have no office but not more than retail have to notice file? No, notice filing is a very important, not a form of registration. It never applies to investment advisors. On the test, it'll be about mutual funds and whether we're going to coordinate or qualify to register the security, and the answer is no. But you can think of notice filing as a courtesy to the state administrator. The state administrators weren't very happy with what was called the National Securities Market Improvement Act because it took power away from them. And, and then we said, okay, well, how about as a courtesy, we do this notice filing thing, and if you want some money, we'll send it your way. But I don't think you're going to see notice filing in the context of an investment advisory firm federally covered. You're going to see notifying in the context of Franklin Templeton fund distributors rolling out a Wisconsin tax-free fund. And do they have to register that mutual fund in the state of Wisconsin? The answer is no, because it's federally covered. Would they make a notice filing to Wisconsin that they're selling the Wisconsin tax-free fund to residents of Wisconsin? The answer is yes. That's not a form of registration. It's a courtesy. It's about paying fees. Balance sheet equations, PE ratio, definitely on the test. PE ratios, price to earnings ratio, is a valuation technique. There's lots of valuation techniques: PE, price to book, DCF. And there's two styles of investors you're going to get tested on. You're going to get tested on value investors, and value investors would like to buy stocks with a low PE ratio. And growth investors who would be willing to pay a higher PE because, it's not about NVIDIA's earnings today. It's about NVIDIA's earnings, 5, 10 years out, right? That would be a growth investor. They'd be willing to pay, whatever. We also use it to take companies public. I had a tutoring session just before our session here, and we were talking about potentially taking Chick-fil-A public or an In-N-Out Burger public, and whether we're going to make a registration statement with the SEC. And if we are, then we could coordinate as a way to register that with the state that we want to sell it in. But we could use PE. I'd say, well, listen, we know what the multiple in the fast food market is. The common multiple would be, 15 to 1 or 18 to 1. We should be able to take you public at something close to that. Right? It's a valuation technique. Sometimes that technique doesn't work in certain circumstances, particularly if we don't have any earnings. Right? Growth investors willing to pay a higher PE. I would be prepared to do that on 7, 65, 66. There's not a lot of math on these exams. I think people overestimate the amount of math. But remember, I told you math is practical application. And we don't want to give up, things where there's no interpretation of the answer. So I might say the stock has a price of 48, the earnings are 4. What is the PE ratio? And you take 48 divided by 4, and you would tell me, what is that, 12? Second thing I would add is if you can't decide what math to do, almost all the math is division. So if you can't decide what to divide, take the first number, price, divided by the second number, earnings in this case. Right? So I'd be doing you a favor to mask every key on the calculator key except the divide key. That's the one you got to pay attention to. All right, so we had PE, definition, what really got me to, that's definitely there. The textbook does not give great definitions like they ask on the test. Got a 78 on Brian's. That's really surprising because Brian has pretty strong correlation. So that really surprises me that you passed the test key practice test and then missed the mark on the actual one. Was that your first time through it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I had six math questions on the 65. One of the ones that you had in your 65
Well,
playlist
how
was
long ago was this? How long ago was it that you
I,
took it?
I took it on last Friday.
Okay, while the herd is fresh, I told you, go get that test specification document and go through that and see if it comes back to you like more what those questions were, so we can certainly prepare them for you next time. I think did you win the coaching call, Jock? Is that why you're here?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so just if you're watching this as a replay, this is not an invitation made to anybody watching this. This is an invitation to the people who are participating in this coaching call. Jock, once you do that, sign up for my office hours for paid students, and I'd be more than happy to go those questions with you. So you have my permission to register for that. And what I want you to look for is the kind of things that, I don't want you to have PTSD as you run into things, but Dean, I found this question. This reminds me of the thing, and then we can attack that. Right now, it's kind of hard to attack when we have I'm kind of considering a kind of a ghost question. I don't doubt you saw it, but when you have the feedback on that call thing, for example, I joke it wasn't a drive-by. You went in a cave to slay the dragon. You did get smoked, but you got a good look at him.
Yeah.
But there's some things that are probably not as you don't remember as well as you need to for us to kind of attack that. And I remember what we said about the next draw. Be prepared. I do like you were confident of that. That's surprising. Two things are surprising. Surprisingly, you got a 78 on Brian's Test Geek, and surprisingly, you were confident and thought when you hit the button, you had the pass, because usually that would be the case. So, who knows? Stuff happens. So we just got to deal with that. 30-day wait, and then we go down and we get it done, right? So,
Right.
you bet. So just find those questions like that. like your PE ratio one, that we can handle. Should I be getting a 75/80? Absolutely. I actually think on your third attempt, no, I don't want to send out negative vibes, but as you know, the third attempt is way more serious because we missed that third attempt. You got a 180-day wait period. So we definitely, I've been joking about the margin of safety, right? And
Right.
we don't want to go down there and cross our fingers or hope. We want to know that we're going to go down there and we're going to pass this thing the third time out. And as I told you, my experience has been with close but almost passing scores. We're looking for the other variables because it's not so much that you weren't dedicated, disciplined, organized. It's not that you had a knowledge deficit because your scores reflect that you knew what you were being asked, you know what you're being answered, but boy, we want to overlearn for sure. So you said 75, 80, maybe 85, 90, but as much as we can, trying to avoid memorizing questions and answers. So,
Sure.
Noah, do you have Brian's Test Geek supplement?
I do, and I've taken it twice. They were a pretty big window in between, and I got a 74 in the first one, and then failed. And then I got or sorry, I got a 64 on the first one,
Okay,
and then
okay.
failed. And then I got like a 68 on the second one, and
Okay,
then
well,
failed
two
again.
things for both of you gentlemen. In my practice test playlist, my practice tests I wrote are not diagnostic. They're not designed to, if you get a 90, you're going to get a 90 on the test. They come from what I call questions from for front, debrief. So go find my 65 exam that's debrief. And what I'm hoping for the both of you that you'll see questions there that I've written based on conversations like this and maybe it'll jot your memory a little bit. I'm not allowed, I got a guy testing tomorrow. I think he's going to pass. I'm not allowed to ask you, like, what was question 35? I am allowed to ask, what do you think we could have done a better job on? Right. And I say, I say, well, you're not going to see that. And then somebody says, you lied. I saw it. Oh, okay. Well, so let's get that right. So check out those two practice exams. Again, they're not diagnostic. They're just from debrief. Maybe that will jot your memory on some of the things you felt, that you could have done better on.
Sure.
That's what we're hoping for. And then remember, just make sure you're preparing for the new draw. Uh, I call it tabula rasa, blank slate. You got to kind of pretend you're a blank slate and
Hmm.
that you're going to go down and do this, even though we know you've been in the cave once or twice, right? So that part's good. I mean, that you're familiar with the cave. I get excited. I had lady last night, Dawn, if you're watching, I don't know why she'd be watching now that she's passed all her exams, but Dawn last night was on our live stream. Were you guys there last night when we did our live stream? Dawn had taken the 65 three times. I don't recommend that. But I was so happy for her. And I told her she not only passed her 65, she passed a test of her resiliency, which I think is going to be a good indicator that she's going to be successful in our industry. And I was joking with Don and a guy named Vince who was in a very similar situation that I get so in spirit filled about those folks who, get it done on their second or third attempt that sometimes I have to remind people that's not ideal. We're not celebrating those people because we want you to suffer that misfortune. We want you to pass the first time. But,
Yeah.
a lot of very successful men and women in our business have been challenged in this barrier to entry, these exams. I joke one of my best brokers, he used to go out and say, Noah, if anybody knows this stuff, it's me. I had to take this damn test 5 times.
Mhm.
Proof that people invest with you because they like you and they trust you, not because you're a good test taker. I mean, we want to, it's a barrier to entry. I had a guy, Russell, Russell was a client of mine, and he said, Dean, I know you made $24,000 in commissions on this transaction. I said, well, I don't know why you think I would try and hide that from you. I mean, correct. He said, I could refer other people to you, and you could split those commissions with me. I said, Russell, that's a great idea. I handed him a stack of books. He goes, what's that? And I go, those are the study materials for your SIE, your 7, and your 66. And when you pass all those exams, I'll pay you, give you a pad of 50%. You refer somebody to me, the commission's 24 grand, I'll give you 12 of that. He goes, well, I don't want to do that. I said, well, I didn't think so. And so, sorry, all I can say is thank you very much. We
Yeah.
don't give concessions, discounts, and allowances to people who aren't in the business. And this is kind of a barrier to entry, right? I tell you, you got to take this damn exam and until you get past this hurdle, no money for you. I'm joking, but fear and greed are great motivators. The fear of having to wait 180 days, Noah, is we don't want it to be debilitating, but it's a good motivator. And then greed. I have guys who, Dean, they're like on the insurance side and they can't do wrap accounts and things like that without their 65. And so they've been laying that off to somebody else in the office and they can't get paid on it. We're not allowed to get paid on it. And a lot of them say, Dean, that's just become too much money. I can't do that anymore. As much as I love that guy in the office, I need to bring that back under my umbrella. So, or a lot of insurance companies are telling me that they have like boxes they have to check on their matrix to get paid, like a payout matrix something. And if they don't have the 65 box checked, it's not even doing business in 65. It's just that box bumps their payout to, a higher level. So, focus on the fear and the greed as motivators, and maybe that will be helpful in terms of getting these done. But
Yeah, I've got a buddy that's failed it 6 times,
there
and
you
he
go.
is just, it's
I
been
haven't yet.
brutal to watch.
Hey, Amy, I doubt Amy's listening either, but shout out to Amy. She was a top producer on the insurance side. I mean, she brings in a lot of money. And the joke I had with her is, you're not going anywhere. They're going to let you take this 20 times because they certainly aren't letting you go. You're not a baby broker. I mean, it's easy to let baby brokers go because we're not losing any revenue.
Right.
So same thing. She took it a gazillion times, and she finally got it. But now I got to get to say that she didn't devote the time and energy we'd like. But I mean, that's because she's the top producer, right? So I mean, she didn't take 4 weeks off to just go with their 65 book and go into the desert and study. So she just kept going down there, and then who knows? Who knows? Maybe she eventually memorized the entire Q bank, right? 3 times 180-day wait, 3 times 180-day wait. Crazy. Any tips to nail down ERISA? Yeah, well, ERISA doesn't apply, Philip, to municipal employers. It's for private employers. So that's our first thing. Municipal employers, public, employers are allowed to hand out defined benefit pension plans where the employer, the city of Chicago or the state of Illinois, for example, promise these retirees a percentage of their base pay and health care for the rest of their life. Wow. And then they're not required to actually fund those pension plans. And so both the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois have tens of billions of dollars in unfunded pension liabilities. Now, ERISA was passed in 1974, and it stands for every ridiculous idea since Adam. I'm joking. It stands for the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. There were two crises in the pension plan arena. One was Studebaker, a private corporation, had a defined benefit plan. They went bankrupt. And the employees didn't get what they were promised. For many years, the retirees of Studebaker would go to the mailbox and they'd get a check. And then one day the check wasn't there. The second problem was the Teamsters kept lending their pension money to the mob. And we didn't think that was a good idea as a fiduciary. Right? I joke Jimmy Hoff is the first guy who turned down the loan request, and we haven't seen him since. So ERISA says that you're fiduciaries to the beneficiaries of the plan. In other words, you shouldn't be managing this plan for the benefit of the corporation. And then it says there are people that might have adverse interest to that pension plan. Adverse interest means their interest in the pension plans is different or different. Please note, I didn't say a conflict of interest. I said an adverse interest, meaning there's no way for us to reconcile those adverse interests. Usually conflicts of interest can be handled through disclosure. But the two main things about ERISA to know are that ERISA, as a fiduciary, you're going to either have a defined benefit pension plan for your employees, where the employer is assuming the investment risk. I don't know many corporations do that anymore, or a defined contribution plan, where the employee assumes the investment risk. And that's how most people are familiar with, like a 401k, for example. Now, the problem we have with a 401k is that we can end up where we're having our higher end employees getting most of the benefits. And when that happens, your plan is said to be top heavy. And so there's some things you can do, some safe harbors for fiduciaries under ERISA, actions you can take to limit your liabilities. One of those is what's called an investment policy statement. That's not required under ERISA, but it does mitigate risk as a fiduciary. It's an overview of how we're going to, manage this money. It doesn't talk about particular securities. I know some firms now are actually doing this with their individual clients, saying, "Hey, Dustin, why don't we do an investment policy statement? Just, kind of guide us, in terms of managing your money." Maybe Dustin says he doesn't want, firearms or alcohol or whatever, in his investments. Second thing we can do to mitigate risk under 404C, which is part of ERISA, is in that 401k, if we offer our employees at least three, we have three things, three different mutual funds, right? And that would mitigate our risk. We can also mitigate our risk through immediately vesting our employees. If we immediately vest, so we say we're going to match you dollar for dollar in the first 3%, and the vesting schedule is 5 years. That means after 5 years, all that money belongs to you. First year, the money you put in there is always yours, but the match isn't yours till the fifth year. If we immediately say that money is yours, that too would mitigate some of our risk as a fiduciary under ERISA. So those are some of our risk mitigation strategies as it applies. We're always trying to limit liability, and sometimes people don't. I don't know why people wouldn't do this. This is just blows my mind. But why would you not participate in a 401k with a dollar for dollar match pre-tax? I would just make up a number, 3%. It's just stupid. And sometimes people just don't elect to get involved. And so another thing we can do as a fiduciary, not be held liable, is to have a QDIA, a default, a qualified default investment alternative, where we automatically enroll you in the 401k, and we put the match or whatever we're putting in there into a target date fund where we have to do an asset allocation mix based on your age and so forth. Now, I had an insurance company, and oh my God, there were like 1,000 agents taking a 65, and sometimes it's like a contagion. All of a sudden, everybody was warped about ERISA. I'm like, oh my God, why? There's only 2 or 3 questions on ERISA. If you tell me you missed your mark because of ERISA, I'm going to say, yeah, you had other problems somewhere. All right, let's see. So what's our next one here? Dustin, you should be getting in the mid 70s is where I'd like you to be. So mid 70s is where you want to be. No office, we did that one. Let's see, 75, 80, we did that one. We did ERISA. Passed the six 3 times. Wow, crazy, crazy, crazy. Well, you know, um, the 7 is full registration, and Dustin, I guess it'll have a happy ending because I feel like telling everybody taking a 6, why don't you just take a 7 because you're going to need one eventually. I can't tell you how many men and women have 6s and 26s, and they work at a mutual fund family, and then they got to go take a 7. So I think it's going to overall, in the scheme of things, it'll be a good thing that you're taking a 7 instead of a 6. All right, Noah, if I missed you, okay. There you go. When it's 50-50, is there a certain way to understand what they're asking? Yeah, let's see your example for sure.
All right. So it was um, like an agent of an issuer paid for the registration, issuer paid for the agent issuer's registration. 3 months later, the issuer, terminated the agent. What happens with this registration? The one that I was a 50-50 on was the registration is eligible till the end of the calendar year.
No, 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 no.
And
No.
and then the other one was the registration, the agent of the issuer can go work with another issuer, but like I knew what the answer was, but it didn't say that, he has to be hired on. He has the ability to go work with another issuer.
Oh, yeah, well, you got to be in good standing. So there's no such thing as somebody having uh, I'll call it a dangling registration, a registration that isn't effective somewhere. So we can eliminate the choice that says this registration works. It does not, unless you're associated. Now, the agent of the issuer is different than an agent of a broker dealer in this regard. If I'm raising money I always think of Sam Altman, how many billions of dollars he's raised, tens of hundreds of billions of dollars, and he's not being paid by ChatGPT, OpenAI to raise that money, and so he doesn't need to register as an agent of the issuer because he's not receiving compensation. But if he said to OpenAI, ChatGPT, that I've been talking to my banker friends, and they're telling me that I should get some compensation for raising all this money. I would like, 1/4, 1% of the money I'm raising for the issuer. Then he's an agent of the issuer, needs to be registered, right? So it's this idea of compensation. Now, if he's registered as an agent of that issuer and he leaves, in this case, it's going to be no deal. Now let's talk about an example where I don't need to register. One of my go-to moves was to say, hey, why don't you meet me up at the winery for a due diligence tour and tasting? We can decide what kind of asset allocation you may want to make to the winery. And you invest $300,000, 8% commissions 24 grand, and I get a payout on that. There's a guy named Ed Curry who's a senior vice president of hospitality, and he also gets people involved in that investment opportunity. This is a private placement under Reg D, and he takes you around the winery and you sign up. There is no commission there, and Ed doesn't need to be an agent of the issuer. I don't know, let's say he makes 100 grand as the senior vice president of hospitality. He's not getting a commission. Now, if he says, hey, when Dean does what I just did, he gets 24 grand. I think I should get some money. And maybe the winery says, that's a good point. We'll give you 5 grand. Now he's an agent of the issuer. So the issuer here is about compensation. And then your point about this particular question, there's no dangling registration. So there's no circumstance in which anybody who's an associated person, a living, breathing human being walking planet Earth, has a registration that isn't in good standing somewhere. With the issuer, with the broker dealer, there's no dangling registrations in that regard, right? So the proper answer would be we could do an amendment of the registration, right? I'll use the thing that's more typical, which would be, agent of broker dealer. U4 is hello, U5 is goodbye. So not good somebody starts talking about a U5. And so there, if we file a U5, we disassociate you from the broker dealer, then you would do an amended U4 at your new firm, right? If there's no circumstance in which you're still a registered person in that scenario. All right, but they're usually on the 50-50. There can be some pivot words, there can be, but that's the 50-50 thing, right? The 50-50 thing. I kind of now on NASA exams, that's even tougher than what I was teasing Dustin about on his FINRA exams, because it's not about an investment suitability question. It could be a more of a contextual legal question, right? So I sometimes have attorneys who are taking NASA exams. They go, man, Dean, if I don't pass, it's going to be embarrassing. And I say, absolutely. Because if anybody should understand the legalese, it would be you, right? Brian has on his practice test question about this scenario. Remember that thing about the guy receiving remuneration, Brian calls it. That's just the fancy word for compensation. And Brian does it intentionally. Test prep vendors do it intentionally because that's the grammar and phraseology of the NASA exams, which is just really challenging. And I had a young lady. Can you imagine her primary language is Mandarin? She's one of my favorite students. She thought I was laughing at her, but I was laughing with her. She goes, "Why do you think that's funny?" And what she was telling me is that she's putting some of the words on her 65 into her Google Translator, and no equivalent Mandarin word is coming back. And I said, "Well, I'm not surprised because I don't think it's in English to begin with. So it doesn't surprise me that you're putting, words in there." I had a guy tutoring. He's going to pet test tomorrow. I'm sure he's going to pass. But I could see where the phraseology was giving, and he had interpreted it as a gift, but it was giving a security as a bonus, not gifting the securities. And I was joking with him. I'm not a Latin guy, but I have some geeky friends who are took Latin in college. I said, I bet you're probably right that gifting and giving are kind of the same Latin root, but that is not a gift of securities, right? So that's just the challenge of NASA exams, certainly. Form ADV shows education history of those involved in the firm, but a U form does not. That would be true because we got to give you background on that. I don't think it's a testable distinction, Philip, unless you saw it, I guess. Education usually shows up as something we're not interested in, involves in the new account form of a customer, right? There's no educational. There's where that usually shows up. Yes, I was just taking the easier out and knew better. There you go. There you go. Like I say, I think Dustin, if you're still here, I think you're better served to have a seven. At some point, that's the better way to go. All right. Anything else, gentlemen?
So Dean, I took the Brian's test, got that 78, and then I was in Kaplan, got an 80, and then
Yeah,
before
man,
that
that's
one,
tough.
I got a 75, then a 72. But in between that, I had a buddy who just took the 65, passed that 2 weeks ago for his third try, and he signed up for STC. I took an STC exam and I got a 64.
Wow. Well, there you go. So I think it would happen either way. So let me first say that if you were using STC and got those scores and missed your mark and then went to Kaplan, I think you still have a 64. When people change vendors, the scores drop. Now, the second thing I'd say though, it's kind of like Thibodeau with the New York Knicks. I mean, is he a great coach? He is, but at some point you lose the locker room. And so I'm not opposed to getting a different voice. If Kaplan for some reason, there's reason to believe that's not speaking to you in the way it needs to because you're getting those scores and we didn't get our mark. So I'm not opposed to that. Let's push up those STC scores to the mid 70s. And it would be the same advice. I don't believe we should be monogamous when it comes to passing our test. Anything we can do to add, and if that means multiple vendors, so be it. What is your QBank usage on Kaplan? Do you have like lots of questions left or not?
No, I took 3,600 out of the 4,200.
Oh, well, there you go. So let's get the STC. I'm not going to get into, using different people's logins. That's between you and your friend in STC. But that being said, yeah, let's go for it. Yeah,
Okay.
you go to that STC QBank and start pushing, doing the remediation, get those in the mid 70s. Well, both Kaplan and STC, I think, are great vendors. So, I mean, like I say, and usually you're going to adjust to that. So I wouldn't beat yourself up. I think you're going to adjust quickly to their phraseology of these issues, right? So, but yeah, particularly now that we are getting those kind of scores because there's a couple things that are typical of your experience. You're kind of a conundrum, an anomaly that you did. It sounds like what you were asked to do as it relates to Kaplan and Brian and got the scores that reflect you're going to pass and you didn't. So we got to do something different, right?
Yeah.
And something different
Cool.
could be adding STC to the mix, getting a different voice in there, right? And
Yeah.
see if that makes some more sense to you. All right,
Cool.
anything else?
Thanks, Dean.
You bet. And then remember, if you find those questions, you're welcome to join me for those free office hours for paid students as well. And that
Okay.
only extends to people in the coaching call that, if you're watching the replay, this is an invitation for you. Same
Okay.
for you, Philip, as well. And you have a very famous name in the securities industry. You probably already know that, right?
Yeah, infamous, right?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's infamous. I mean, it is what it is, right? But you had a guy named
We
Dick
had a good
Foley.
run.
Very good run. Now, hey, test question on NASA exams. When Lehman Brothers went bankrupt, there were all kinds of laymen, men and women who had deferred compensation,
Right,
not covered by ERISA.
right.
And they became general creditors of Lehman Brothers to the tune of, millions of dollars. Wow. Talk about have to start over. Can you imagine you spent your career building up that PS? Some of them weren't properly diversified. But Philip, I keep thinking I'm gonna go on eBay and try and find some swag from days of yesteryear. Lehman Brothers, Drexel Burnham Lambert,
Yeah, yeah.
some of our former major big bulge bracket firms that are no longer with us. All right, and then we also had a Secretary of Navy, John Lehman, who was
Oh
uh,
yeah.
I was in the Marine Corps, and he was our Secretary of Navy at the time. So, very big name. I don't think it's infamous, but I'm in the securities industry, and going belly up is kind of the nature of our business. So,
Right, yeah.
so
You're not cheating, you're not trying. That's right.
yeah. I had a guy who was tutoring one time, and his last name was the same name that was on this major firm's door, and I go, okay, I got to ask, are you related? He
Yeah.
goes, yeah, that's my uncle. I said, well, man, it's kind of cool. I always joke though, when you start at a firm like that, I have all kinds of men and women who are second, third generation in our business. Like sometimes feel sorry for them because there are more eyes on them. I had a guy who took over his family's book of business, and then when you miss your mark, people are like, so. All right, guys, I'll see you later.
All right, Dean,
Thanks,
you're the
Dean.
man.
Okay.
Take it easy.
Bye bye.